Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxation Channel. Tonight we step into a North China village at the edge of winter, where the fields are stubbled gold, the air tastes like dry straw and smoke, and the sun slips away so early that afternoon already feels like evening. You stand at the village gate with your sleeves full of cold wind, watching people move faster than usual, because this is the season when mistakes become legends, and legends usually begin with somebody saying, "We still have time." You probably will not survive this if you treat winter like a scenic backdrop and not a patient, organised enemy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know where you are listening from and what your local time is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive with the last carts of millet stalks rattling over frozen ruts, and the first thing you notice is not panic but rhythm. Nobody's sprinting around like a stage play about disaster. They're simply doing everything at once. A woman kneels by a doorway and pushes mud into a crack between wall and frame with her thumb. Two boys carry bundles of reeds taller than they are and pretend they are generals until their grandmother clicks her tongue and sends them toward the shed. A man on the lane tests the hinge on a wooden gate 3 times, not because he's bored, but because a loose gate in winter means drifted snow inside the yard, and drifted snow inside the yard means extra labour before breakfast, and extra labour before breakfast means less strength for the rest of the day. You are learning already that winter survival is made of tiny annoyances prevented in advance. The village itself sits low and practical, tucked near fields that have already given what they can. Ancient Chinese rural life varies wildly across regions and dynasties, and historians still argue whether some winter practices spread mostly through migration, local trial and error, or state influence through taxation and agricultural manuals. What does not change is the logic in front of you. Cold air is a thief, wind is its accomplice, moisture is a traitor. You do not need a philosopher to explain this, though somebody in the village will absolutely try after 2 bowls of hot gruel. The elders watch the sky like accountants, thin clouds at sunset, a sting in the wind from the northwest, and the way the dogs curl tighter tell them enough to begin the final checks. You stand in a courtyard and see one of the mainstream facts of northern Chinese village life that scholars mention often. Many households rely on millet, especially in the north, as a hardy staple grain suited to dry conditions and shorter growing seasons. Millet porridge, millet cakes, millet stored in jars, millet husks used and reused. It is not glamorous, but glamour does not keep fingers attached in January. Your job, because in this village everyone gets a job 5 minutes after arriving, is to help carry stalk bundles to a work area where they are sorted. The useful parts divide fast. Thicker stems become fuel for small cooking fires or kindling. Some straw becomes bedding filler, some becomes roofing repair, some becomes matting. Nothing gets the luxury of being just trash. You reach for one bundle and a wiry auntie, who appears to have been born 30 years old and mildly disappointed in everybody, flicks your wrist and tells you to keep the stems aligned. "Crooked stacks catch damp," she says. You nod like this is obvious to you. It is not obvious to you. You're doing your best not to look like a city person who thinks rustic means decorative baskets. As dusk comes on, the sounds change. Day sounds are broad and open, carts and voices and chickens and chopping. Evening sounds are smaller and closer. Mortars thump grain in a steady heartbeat pattern. Wooden ladles tap pottery rims. Doors shut earlier than you expect, then open again when someone remembers a rope or a tool or a child. The cold enters all at once when the sun drops, and you feel it in your teeth. Not dramatic mountain expedition cold, just a plain, efficient cold that slips through cloth and settles in your joints like it pays rent. The village headman, who is the face of a man carved from old walnut wood, gathers several households near the threshing area to discuss stores. It is less speech and more counting out loud. Grain jars checked, dried vegetables checked, salt checked, Oil low in one house, acceptable in another, firewood not enough for anyone, ever, which is why people speak of fuel the way modern people speak of battery percentage. You can almost hear it. I am at 20% and I still need to cook supper. One old woman laughs through 3 missing teeth and says the best fuel is your son-in-law because he burns hot and complains even hotter. That is joke 1. And it gets a better response than you expect, because winter humour here is not decoration. It is insulation for the mind. If you cannot laugh while patching a wall in the dark wins too much territory. You help plaster an outer wall with a mixture of earth and chopped straw, kneading it in a trough with your feet until it reaches the right stickiness. The mud is colder than you were prepared for, and the children watching you are enjoying this deeply. One girl asks if your village has no mud. You tell her your village has very polite mud. She squints, decides you're either lying or foreign in a useful way, and goes back to braiding cord. The repair work matters because packed earth walls hold heat far better than flimsy materials, especially when maintained. Cracks are invitations. Winter accepts every invitation. Inside one home, you duck under a lintel polished smooth by generations of shoulders and enter a dim room where the air smells faintly of grain, fabric, and ash. The family is rearranging space as much as supplies. Summer clutter disappears. Tools move inward but off the floor. Sleeping things come closer together. Drafty corners become storage corners. The centre of life shrinks. This is one of the quiet truths of surviving severe seasons. You do not heat the whole world. You make a smaller world and defend it. A grandfather sits near the doorway shaving a peg for a latch repair. He tells you that in his youth, one bad winter froze water jars indoors and split them clean. This is likely not exaggerated. In many northern inland regions, severe cold snaps can push temperatures low enough to freeze stored water if houses are poorly sealed. He taps the peg against the floor and adds, with satisfaction, that his father blamed the jars, not the weather, because blaming weather fixes nothing. This feels like both practical wisdom and a family tradition of being emotionally unavailable. By full dark, food appears in stages. Steam rises from bowls and everyone leans in toward it for warmth before the first bite. The meal is simple and hot, which makes it magnificent. Millet porridge thick enough to hold shape near the edges, pickled greens, a little bean paste, a few pieces of dried turnip softened in broth. You learn to eat slowly because the warmth leaves fast, and because quick eaters are immediately asked to do another chore. That is joke too, but also policy. As the room settles, stories begin, and with stories come the village's stranger details. A boy whispers that if you hang a certain gourd shell by the eaves, mice will avoid the grain because they fear the spirit inside. A woman snorts and says mice fear cats and nothing else. Yet later you do see odd objects tied near storage bins, bits of red thread, old charms, a carved scrap of wood blackened by smoke, quirky tidbit for the night, and a real one in spirit if not in exact shape. Rural winter survival often mixes practical storage methods with folk beliefs and ritual protections, because when your margin is thin, you use every method available, including the ones that reassure the heart. You step outside again to carry in more water and the sky's painfully clear. Stars crowd the dark like spilled salt. The cold is sharper now, and the village lanes are nearly empty except for one late worker covering a stack with reed mats and tying knots with stiff fingers. You hear a muffled cough from inside a house, then another. Winter illness always waits at the edge of the village, not as one dramatic plague rider, but as a parade of small enemies. Dry throats, cracked skin, fevers, chest congestion, a twisted ankle on icy ground that becomes serious because rest is expensive. People prepare for cold as weather, but they are also preparing for cold as pressure on every weakness. Near the well, 2 men discuss whether the coming season will be dry and bitter or damp and heavy with snow. One says dry cold kills old people faster. The other says wet cold kills children faster. Neither sounds like he enjoys being right. You stand there holding a bucket handle that bites into your palm and realise the village is not just storing things. It is sorting risk. Which households need help sealing roofs? Who has enough labour? Who has a pregnant daughter? Who has a father who pretends he is strong and then sits down too suddenly? Survival here begins long before a blizzard. It begins in memory, in gossip, in knowing who is one bad week away from trouble. A rooster, deeply confused by lantern light, crows once from a coop and is immediately insulted by 3 different people from 3 different courtyards. That is joke 3, courtesy of the bird, and honestly he deserves it. Later, as you settle near the warmest part of the room, you watch hands more than faces. Hands mending sleeves by weak light, hands knotting cord, hands turning grain in a tray to check for damp clumps, hands rubbing a child's feet to warm them before sleep. This is the first lesson winter teaches you here. Fuel matters, food matters, walls matter. Yes. But what carries the village towards spring is repetition without drama. Every task done a little early, every crack sealed before it widens, every bowl stretched without pretending hunger is noble. You start the evening thinking survival is a heroic event. You end it understanding that survival is a schedule. Outside, frost creeps over the yard in a thin white skin. Inside, voices drop lower. Somebody yawns. Somebody else keeps talking anyway, because there is always one person in every century who thinks their opinion on weather patterns is a gift to the community. You listen. You warm your fingers around a bowl gone only slightly tepid, and you feel the village tightening itself for the long, cold ahead with the patience of people who have done this many times and still respect it every time. By morning, the village looks as if someone has tightened every line by hand. Doors open less often and for shorter moments. Yard brooms scrape frost off packed ground in quick strokes. You wake to the sound of a roof being tapped, not dramatically, just a steady wooden knocking as 2 men test loose tiles and patch thatch before the wind gets ideas. If winter is the enemy, then architecture is the argument you make back. And today you spend the day learning how that argument is built from dirt, angle, habit, and stubbornness. You step into the lane and the air hits your nose with that dry, cold sting that makes every smell stand out. Damp earth near the animal pen, chaff dust by the threshing space, a faint thread of smoke from a cooking fire already dying down to save fuel. The houses sit close enough to help one another, but not so close that one roof problem becomes everyone's roof problem. Their shapes seem plain at first, but plain is only what cleverness looks like after centuries of repetition. A mason with white eyebrows and a back that bends only when he chooses beckons you toward a wall repair. He slaps the side of a house with his palm and tells you to listen. The wall gives a dull, dense sound, packed earth, layered and tamped hard, mixed with local soil and fibre, built thick enough to slow both summer heat and winter cold. In many parts of northern China, rammed earth and packed earth construction remains common for generations because the materials are cheap, local, and surprisingly effective when kept dry and maintained. This is one of those mainstream facts that sounds humble until you stand beside a wall wider than your forearm is long and realise it is doing the work of a coat for an entire family. He points to the lower edge where the wall meets the foundation. Water climb, he says. Cold follows water. Then he points to the roof eaves. Rain falls. Snow sits. Bad eaves make fools. You're getting a full engineering lecture in 6 words at a time. No diagrams, no scrolls, no dramatic music. Just a man insulting weather and gravity while he patches a seam. The village lanes are arranged with more thought than you first notice. Not every house faces exactly the same direction, because land shape, status, and old boundaries matter. But many homes try to capture winter sun while avoiding the worst direct wind. South-facing orientation becomes a quiet luxury and a practical goal in cold northern regions. You feel the difference immediately when you stand in one courtyard and then another. One feels bright and almost forgiving by mid-morning. The next feels like a clay bowl left in shade. Historians still argue whether household orientation in some villages followed ideal geomantic principles more closely than practical wind and sun concerns, or whether people simply blended both without seeing a contradiction. Here, nobody discusses theory while hauling mud. They just know which yard dries faster after frost. You spend an hour helping build a windbreak along the north side of a courtyard wall. It is not a grand structure, just reed screens lashed to posts, reinforced with brush and old stalk bundles stacked in a way that slows gusts without trapping too much damp. The effect is immediate. Step behind it and the air stops biting quite so hard. You laugh because it feels like cheating, and an old auntie says, "Good, winter cheats first." She says this while tying knots so tight you suspect she could secure a cart to a cloud. Roofwork comes next, and you discover there are at least 12 local opinions on the correct roof pitch, and every opinion is delivered as if dynasties rose and fell over this exact topic. Steeper roof sheds snow better in some places, but local material matters, labour matters, and what kind of storms usually come matters. Thatch needs thickness and careful layering. Tile needs sound support and regular checks. Eaves need to throw water away from walls. You climb a ladder halfway, decide your life choices are interesting, then pass bundles upward while trying not to look down at the chickens, who are watching with the calm confidence of creatures that know they can fly badly and survive anyway. One household uses a double-door trick at the entry. Not fancy. Just a small screened-in vestibule made from boards and woven matting. Open one side, close it, then open the inner door. The point is simple. Do not let the main room exchange all its warmth with the outdoors every time someone forgets the turnips. You walk through it and immediately understand why it matters. The trapped pocket of air feels stale but warmer. Small spaces are easier to protect. A village survives winter partly by creating layers between inside and outside, each one stealing a little power from the wind. Near noon, the sun briefly turns generous, and people use it like a borrowed coin. Quilts come out to air, mats are shaken, grain trays are checked, wall patches dry. A young man angles a reflective pottery shard to bounce a bit more light toward a work area where his mother is mending thick cloth. You joke that he has invented winter luxury. He says if you call it luxury, you can carry the water. That is joke one in a fair trade system. You notice windows are small, often covered with oiled paper, cloth, lattice, or shutters depending on means and region. Glass exists in the world, of course, but it is not a common village solution for every household. Smaller openings mean less heat loss and fewer drafts, though also less light, which is why daytime work clusters near doorways and sunny walls. The rooms feel dim compared to modern spaces, but dimness is part of the bargain. You can have broad views or warmer fingers. The village chooses fingers. At one home, a woman demonstrates a threshold trick by laying a fabric roll at the door base at night and removing it by day if traffic is heavy. Another household uses straw stuffed into a long-stitched tube. Yet another uses old rags wrapped around a stick and calls it the snake. The names differ. The principle does not. Stop moving air at floor level and the whole room feels less cruel. You kneel to feel the difference with your hand and end up sneezing dust into your sleeve while two children laugh as if this is the best entertainment all week. There is also the matter of courtyards themselves. They are not just open spaces for chores. In winter they become controlled environments, organised to reduce unnecessary movement. Water jars close to the kitchen route. Fuel stacks under cover, but reachable. Tools hung where you can grab them with cold hands, not buried behind summer clutter. Paths swept so ice is visible. The courtyard becomes a map of energy use. Every extra step costs calories. Every trip into the wind costs heat. People redesign movement the way a careful cook redesigns a recipe when salt runs low. A grey-bearded carpenter invites you to inspect a roof beam scarred by old smoke, and tells you a local story about a household that once ignored a small leak. By late winter, the damp had weakened a beam, and when heavy wet snow came, part of the roof sagged during the night. Nobody died, but half the family spent the coldest month squeezed into neighbours' homes, and the village remembered the embarrassment longer than the weather. Moral lessons in villages are always 2 parts safety warning, 1 part social humiliation. If fear does not motivate you, gossip will. In the afternoon, you help plaster the inside face of an exterior wall with a finer clay mix. The texture changes from rough to smooth under your palm, and the room already feels less drafty after cracks are filled. A woman adds chopped fibre and a bit of ash to the mix and says her mother swore by this formula. A neighbouring woman says her mother swore at this formula. Quirky tidbit for the day, and very believable. Household construction recipes can be deeply local and almost culinary, passed through families with fierce confidence and inconsistent measurements. A handful means your hand if you're doing it right, and someone else's hand if it fails. The village's practical geometry shows itself most clearly when wind picks up near sunset. You hear it first over the fields, a long low hiss and dry stalk remains, then feel it striking outer walls and curling around corners. In open ground, it is brutal. Inside a well-planned courtyard, it arrives weakened, broken, forced to turn, not gone, but negotiated with. You stand by a wall warmed slightly by the afternoon sun and understand why orientation and wall mass matter more than dramatic fires in a place where fuel is precious. The house stores a little warmth, sheds a little wind, and buys the family a little comfort. Winter survival is often a chain of little advantages. A boy sent to close shutters runs past carrying a board larger than his chest and nearly disappears behind it. Only his boots show. He bumps the frame, mutters something scandalised for a child his age, then glances at you to see if you heard. You did. You absolutely did. You keep a respectful face. He shuts the shutter with enormous dignity and marches off like a small official in charge of darkness. That is joke 2. And honestly, he earns it. At the evening meal, people compare houses the way modern people compare phone battery health and insulation bills, which wall sweats in thaw weather, which roof edge drips onto the path, which courtyard catches the least morning light. Nobody romanticizes mud or reed or timber. If a method works, it is praised. If it fails, it is remembered. A young bride asks if her family's old village used brick in more homes. An elder says yes, in some places and for wealthier households. But brick still needs labour, mortar, upkeep, and good planning. Material alone does not save fools, which seems to be his favourite category of person. As lamps are lit, shadows climb the walls and the rooms shrink into warm pockets of amber light. You sit near the doorway and watch someone hang an extra mat over the entrance for the night. One more layer, one more barrier, one more small refusal to let cold take what it wants. You realise that the village does not fight winter with one invention. It survives by stacking ordinary decisions until they become a system. Thick walls, tight roofs, small openings, smart yard layouts, windbreaks, dry materials, constant repair. It is not flashy. It is beautiful anyway. Outside, the wind presses and slides over the roofs, searching for weakness like a tax collector with excellent memory. Inside, the walls hold steady, and you can feel the difference they make in your bones. Night closes in fast, and the room rearranges itself around the place where sleep and warmth meet. You notice it the moment supper bowls are stacked and rinsed. People stop drifting around the room and start orbiting one structure with the quiet seriousness usually reserved for grain jars and newborn babies. It is the raised sleeping platform, broad, solid, and built like a promise. In northern Chinese homes across many periods, the heated brick or earthen bed platform known as a kang becomes one of the most important winter technologies in daily life. You can call it a bed, but that undersells it. It is a bed, bench, work table, family gathering spot, and winter truce with the universe. You stand close enough to feel faint heat coming through the surface, and then pull your hand back in surprise. The top is warm, not scorching. and the warmth spreads evenly in a way that feels almost suspiciously civilized for a village that has been fighting mud, wind, and leaky roofs all day. A little boy grins at your expression like he has just shown you a magic trick. In a way, he has. The household head lifts a side panel and shows you, proudly, the flue channel running beneath part of the platform. Heat from the cooking fire passes through these channels before smoke exits toward a chimney or vent, warming the mass of the structure. The details vary by region and wealth, and not every home has the same design. But the principle is elegant. You use one fire for more than one purpose. You cook food, and the leftover heat gets trapped and slowly released where people actually sit and sleep. Fuel is too precious to waste on drama. You're invited to sit, and your first mistake is trying to perch politely at the edge, as if this is a stranger's decorative sofa. The grandmother pats the mat and tells you to get fully up there or get out of the way. You climb on awkwardly, boots off, and feel the warmth rise through layers of fabric into your knees and hips. The room suddenly makes sense. The walls matter, the roof matters, the windbreaks matter, but this is where winter becomes livable. Heat held in mass, bodies gathered close, activity pulled inward around a stable warm zone. A teenage girl spreads quilts to air over the platform while it is still warm from the evening fire, then folds them again in a careful stack. Bedding management is almost a science here. Things that touch skin are kept as dry as possible. Quilts are shaken and rotated. Dampness is the enemy because damp cloth steals heat. A mainstream fact woven into countless cold region households is that layered textile bedding, often padded with cotton in later periods or filled with other fibres depending on era and means, transforms winter nights more reliably than any single heavy covering. One giant blanket sounds heroic. Several well-handled layers are what actually work. The family teaches you the evening sequence. Supper first. Fire managed carefully, not wasted. Platform warmed. Ash checked. Vents watched. Mats straightened. Bedding placed only when the heat is right. You ask what happens if the flue clogs. Everyone gives you the same look, which is the universal village expression for "that is why we clean it." Then the grandfather tells a story about a lazy cousin who let soot build up and spent a freezing week sleeping on a platform that looked impressive and felt like a stone altar. This story has the polished edges of a tale told many times, likely because it is useful. Comfort systems are only comfortable if maintained. Children climb onto the platform with the speed of small animals finding sunlight. They play a hand game. Whisper. Get shooshed. Whisper louder. Get shooshed by 3 more adults. And finally settle into winding thread and sorting scraps while the grown-ups continue tasks nearby. The platform is not treated as sacred furniture. It is used constantly. You see a woman mending sleeves there, a man trimming cord ends, an elder rubbing oil into a wooden tool handle, all because warm hands work better and warmer hands make fewer mistakes. One odd little household custom appears when the youngest child is tucked in. A tiny heated brick wrapped in cloth is placed near the foot area for a very old great-aunt whose circulation is poor. Another house, you're told, uses smooth stones, warmed near the stove for the same purpose. Quirky tidbit for tonight, and a practical one. Portable heat objects, from warmed stones to ceramic warmers, show up in many cold weather traditions because they localize comfort where the body struggles most. Toes are persuasive critics. You begin to notice social geography on the platform. The warmest spots are not random, elders, babies, and anyone ill or weakened are placed more carefully. Adults who can tolerate more cold sit at edges or move on and off to do tasks. This is not announced as policy. It is habit, and habit here is policy with better manners. Historians still argue whether the Kang's social function in some regions mattered even more than its heating efficiency, because it shaped sleeping arrangements, family hierarchy, conversation patterns, and even courtship customs. You do not need a symposium to confirm that warmth changes where people gather. It is happening right under your legs. When the cooking fire is fed a little extra to finish heating the channels, smoke smell shifts in the room. You catch the dry mineral scent of warmed brick and packed earth, mixed with cabbage, cloth, and faint ash. It is a deeply human smell, lived in and practical, the opposite of perfume and somehow more comforting. You stretch your fingers over the platform and realise your knuckles no longer ache. A child notices and says, with the cruelty of perfect observation, "Your hands look less stupid now." That is joke one and a complete destruction of your dignity. The grandmother demonstrates another trick by tucking rolled cloths along the outer wall side of the sleeping area to cut drafts that sneak over the platform edge. It is astonishing how many parts of winter survival come down to persuading moving air to go bother someone else. She also keeps sleeping caps and extra socks inside folded bedding so they start less cold at night. You had not considered the emotional power of putting on clothing that is merely cool instead of hostile. As more homes settle in for the night, the village soundscape changes again. From outside, almost nothing. Inside, soft thumps, low voices, coughs, fabric rustle, a ladle against pottery, then long quiet stretches. The Kang helps create this quieter rhythm because people no longer need to hover around an open flame for warmth. Heat lingers, work can continue on the platform, children can sleep while adults murmur nearby. A room with stored warmth has a different temperament than a room chasing heat minute by minute. You are shown how the platform's surface can become too warm if a fire is managed carelessly. A folded mat layer goes down in one area to moderate heat for sleeping. Another corner is left slightly warmer for an elder's aching back. Practical comfort here is adjustable, not luxurious. You make a note in your head that comfort in a fuel-scarce winter village means no one is shivering, no bedding is damp, and nobody burns precious stork fuel trying to fix a problem that better timing could prevent. A middle-aged uncle explains that some households without a well-built heated platform improvise by concentrating sleep in the smallest room and piling bedding thick, sharing body heat closely. He says this with no shame and no romance. Shared warmth is simply a resource, like grain or oil. In harsh winters, privacy shrinks and survival expands. You can feel the truth of that when 3 generations settle within arm's reach, each person becoming part of the night's insulation plan. Then comes the nightly comedy of sleeping positions. One child kicks, another steals quilt edge. The old man snores like a cartwheel in need of grease. A woman turns him on his side without opening her eyes, clearly a maneuver perfected over decades. That is joke 2, though everyone treats it as infrastructure maintenance. The household also watches the fire and flue because warmth can comfort. But smoke and bad ventilation can harm. You see careful habits around tending embers and checking air pathways. Ancient people are often imagined as casually reckless, but most are as safety conscious as their tools and knowledge allow, especially when one mistake can ruin sleep or health for an entire family. The family does not lecture about risk. They simply practice routines and expect you to copy them. Later, with lamps lower, conversation drifts into old village sayings. One person claims sleeping on a properly warmed Kang keeps winter demons from the bones. Another says demons prefer cold feet because they are lazy. A younger woman rolls her eyes and says demons can queue behind the laundry and mill accounts. Joke 3 arrives with that line, and even the grandmother smiles into her sleeve. Yet there is seriousness under the laughter. Warmth at night is not just about comfort. It preserves strength for the next day's labour. Better sleep means steadier hands, fewer illnesses worsened by exhaustion, and less fuel wasted reheating frozen bodies each dawn. You feel this physically as your shoulders unclench for the first time since arriving. The platform gives back what the wind takes. When at last you lie down, the heat beneath you is gentle and steady. The quilts smell faintly of sun from their brief airing, and faintly of smoke from the room, and your breath cools the cloth near your face while your back stays warm. It is an oddly perfect balance. You listen to the tiny sounds of a household settling into sleep, the occasional murmur, a child sighing, the old wood of the house adjusting to cold outside and warmth inside. There is no grand battle scene, no roaring fireplace, no heroic speech, just stored heat under brick and earth, shared carefully among bodies that have learned exactly how to use it. You close your eyes, understanding that tonight, in this village, the warmest invention is not fire itself, it is what people build around it so the heat stays long enough to matter. Morning arrives grey and dry, and the warmth from the sleeping platform lingers in your bones just enough to make stepping onto the cold floor feel like a personal betrayal. The room is already awake. Someone is blowing gently on embers. Someone else is measuring grain with a bowl that has seen so much use its rim shines. A child is trying to sneak a bite of something pickled and getting caught by a grandmother who does not even turn her head. Winter food here is not just meals. It is planning made edible. Today you follow that planning from storage jar to cooking pot, and you start to understand why a village can survive the dead season without grand fuel reserves. Heat is scarce, so food must do more work. It must store well, cook efficiently, nourish steadily, and avoid waste at every stage. In cold months, a well-run pantry can be as life-saving as a well-built wall. You begin in the granary area, where the air feels colder and drier than the main room. Jars, bins, baskets, and raised containers line the space in an order that looks casual, until you notice everyone reaches exactly where they mean to. Millet remains the star of the show, because it stores relatively well when kept dry and protected from pests, and because it cooks into forms that can be stretched for different needs. In northern China, millet and later other grains such as sorghum and wheat, in some regions form the backbone of many rural diets. This is the mainstream fact of the day, and you can feel its truth in the weight of every scoop. The household head shows you 2 bins and makes you compare them. One is daily use, one is reserve. You're not to dip into the reserve casually, not because anyone enjoys suffering, but because winter is long and human optimism is a notorious liar. The jar looks full in early cold, he says. It looks insultingly small by late cold. This is wisdom spoken by a man who has watched people season food freely in the first week, and then stare at empty bins with philosophical regret. Beside the grains are dried things that at first look like bundles of twigs, strings, and wrinkled scraps. Then your eyes adjust and a whole winter menu appears. Slices of turnip and radish hung and dried until leathery. Strips of greens salted and pressed. Beans stored hard and dry. Some mushrooms from better seasons, carefully guarded. Jujubes if a family has access to them. Garlic braided and hanging. A little scallion seed saved. The room smells sharp, earthy, sour, and faintly sweet all at once, like patience in edible form. You help inspect dried vegetables for mould or dampness. This is slower than you expect and surprisingly tense. A single damp pocket can spread trouble. Fingers move quickly, but nothing is rushed. Bad pieces are removed, good pieces shifted, bundles retied. The grandmother mutters that winter food is like raising children. Ignore it for 3 days and it will embarrass you publicly. That is joke 1. And every adult in the room reacts as if she has summarized civilization. Fermentation plays its part too. In crocks near the kitchen root, pickled greens and vegetables wait under weights and brine, sour and salty and alive in a controlled way. Fermented foods matter in cold seasons not only for flavour, though flavour becomes a major morale issue when the landscape turns white and brown for months. They preserve nutrients, diversify the diet, and make plain grain meals feel less like punishment. You taste a sliver of pickled mustard stem and your whole face wakes up. A child laughs and says, "See, it bites back." Accurate. The cooking itself is shaped by fuel limits. You watch the morning meal prepared in a sequence designed to use one heating cycle well. Water goes on first, grain follows. A covered pot traps heat. Residual warmth softens dried vegetables. Nothing sits open on the fire longer than needed. Lids are prized like good boots. Thick porridges and stews earn their place because they tolerate low simmering and feed many people. If a dish can be cooked slowly, while also warming part of the room or platform system, even better. You keep wanting to call this efficient, but the word feels too thin. It is efficient, yes, but also intimate. Everyone in the room understands how much stalk, twig, or dung fuel each extra minute costs. At a neighbouring household, you see another strategy. Grain is ground and mixed into dough for steamed or baked items on days when fuel use can be combined with other heating tasks. A woman pinches dough and jokes that if winter lasts another month, she will start serving decorative pebbles for texture. That is joke too. Though she says it while making food that smells so good, you briefly consider volunteering for more chores in exchange for another piece. There is no illusion of endless variety. The genius is in repetition made sustainable. Thin gruel for one meal, thicker porridge for another, cakes from leftover mash, bean additions when labour is heavy, salted vegetables cut small to flavour a whole pot, a splash of oil when available, used strategically rather than lavishly. Richness is measured in timing and distribution, not in abundance. You see how elders watch portions without making hunger theatrical. Children are fed with a practical softness. Workers heading into wind get slightly more. Those doing indoor mending may get less and complain loudly for tradition's sake. Quirky tidbit for today arrives from a storage corner where a small pouch hangs from a beam. You ask what it is, and a woman tells you it holds strongly scented herbs meant to discourage insects and bad air near certain stores. Whether it works exactly as believed is another matter, but many households across time mix practical pest control with aromatic plants, smoke and protective customs. Even if the herbs do not frighten every pest, they can help dry spaces smell less stale and signal care. In winter, care itself is a kind of medicine. By midday, you accompany two villagers to a pit storage area partly sheltered and carefully lined. Here, hardy roots and tubers in some households or regions can be kept cool and protected from freezing extremes if managed correctly. The details vary by local climate and crops, but underground or semi-underground storage is a classic human answer to winter. The men check insulation covering, brush away melt damp, and inspect for rot. One of them says the roots are like cousins, fine when left undisturbed, dramatic when one goes bad. Joke 3 is delivered with the gravity of a judge. You also learn that food safety in winter has its own traps. Things freeze, things thaw near the hearth, things seem fine and then sour. Water quality matters, pot cleanliness matters, brine strength matters. A young mother explains that winter sickness can come from the stomach just as easily as from the lungs, and a household weakened by digestive illness loses labour fast. She says this while washing a pot with an intensity that suggests she has lived through exactly that problem. You stop romanticising rustic kitchens for at least 7 full minutes. As afternoon fades, a group gathers to process another batch of dried vegetable strips. Hands move in rhythm as they cut, sort, and soak. The conversation drifts toward memory, but always anchored in practical detail. Which year the turnips were sweeter? Which year early frost ruined half the greens? Which family once salted too little and tried to rescue the batch with hot pepper and prayer? Nobody tells these stories to entertain only. They are oral records disguised as gossip. Historians still argue whether official agricultural texts accurately reflect what most ordinary villagers actually ate in winter, or whether those texts overrepresent idealized practices and better-off households. Listening here, you can see why the debate exists. Real food life is local, flexible, and messy. Manuals can list methods. Villages decide what survives contact with weather, labour shortages, soil conditions, and one grandmother's refusal to change what worked for 40 years. Near the hearth, you watch a child learn portion control in the most ancient educational format ever invented, which is an elder saying not that much 5 times in a row. The child puffs his cheeks and claims he is growing for spring. The elder replies that he can grow after everyone survives winter. There is no malice in it, just arithmetic. The evening meal comes together from pieces that looked unpromising by themselves. Grain, dried roots, pickled greens, a little bean paste, maybe scraps of preserved tofu in a household lucky enough to have it, all transformed by heat and salt and timing into a bowl that warms your face as much as your stomach. You notice how people savour sour notes and texture contrasts, crunch from pickles, softness from porridge, chew from rehydrated strips. Flavour is not a luxury here, it keeps appetite alive. And appetite keeps strength up when days feel longer than the sun allows. Someone passes you a small piece of dried fruit and tells you to chew slowly. Sweetness blooms late and faint, more memory than candy. But the room changes when everyone gets a bite. Smiles appear, shoulders loosen, winter kitchens run on calories, but they also run on morale. A tiny treat can quiet the sense that the season is only subtraction. As the bowls empty, leftovers are managed immediately. No pot abandoned, no wet scraps left where they can sour. Water is reused where sensible, ashes saved for cleaning or other tasks. The discipline is seamless because everyone knows the real threat of winter is rarely one dramatic failure. It is many small losses that add up whilst no one is looking. You sit with warm hands around the last of the broth and watch the cook scrape the pot clean with a flat spoon. Every useful bit guided into tomorrow's plan. That is the thing that settles over you tonight. These households are not only storing food, they are storing options. Drying, salting, fermenting, rationing, combining, stretching, sequencing heat with cooking. Every method widens the margin just enough. Outside, frost thickens on the yard paths and the air sharpens again. Inside, the crock sits sealed, the grain jars stand ready, and the kitchen smells of sour greens and warm millet. Winter can be deadly. Yes, but here it is, met with shelves, lids, brine, and hands that know exactly how to turn hard stores into another day. The cold settles deeper now, and the village starts to look softer at the edges, because everyone is wrapped in layers that turn ordinary people into moving quilts. You step into the courtyard and immediately understand that clothing here is not fashion, not self-expression, not a fun seasonal mood. It is engineering that has to bend, work, dry, and survive repairs. Today the whole village seems to be sewing, padding, patching, tying, folding, and adjusting what stands between skin and wind. You begin with your own embarrassment. Someone takes one look at your clothing and clicks their tongue so hard it feels like a weather report. Your sleeves are too loose at the wrist. Your neck is underprotected. Your footwear is acceptable only if your goal is to become a cautionary tale. Within minutes, 2 women and 1 elderly man have reorganised your winter setup with the brisk confidence of people who have rescued fools before breakfast. Cloth wraps are added, ties are tightened, a padded outer layer is borrowed. You feel bulkier, less elegant, and much warmer. This is a complete victory. In many parts of ancient and imperial China, ordinary villagers rely on hemp, ramie, coarse cloth, later cotton where available and affordable, wool in some regions and trade contexts, and animal skins or fur for additional warmth depending on local ecology and household means. That broad material mix changes across dynasties and regions, but the mainstream fact is simple. Winter survival depends as much on textile skill as on heating skill. A cracked wall can be patched in a day. A bad clothing system punishes you every hour. Inside the workroom, if a room full of mending can be called that, people sit close to light and warmth with baskets at their knees. Needles flash in and out of thick cloth. Old garments are opened and repadded. Seams are reinforced where friction wears them thin. Children's sleeves are lengthened with saved strips. Nothing is discarded while it still has one useful side left. Fabric here lives several lives, first as clothing, then as patching, then as lining, then as wrapping, then as stuffing, then finally as rag. By the time a cloth is done, it has contributed more to household survival than many proud officials. A woman shows you a padded jacket construction, layer by layer, outer cloth, filling, inner lining, stitched through so the padding does not slump into cold clumps. The stitching lines are not decorative only. They keep insulation where it should be after washing, damp weather and rough use. She lets you hold an unfinished one and you are shocked by the weight. Winter garments ask you to carry your shelter on your body. You had imagined warm clothes. What you actually get is mobile architecture. The village children move around in little bundles with red noses and impressive confidence. They are constantly being adjusted by passing adults. Hat straightened, collar tucked, waist tie retied, extra layer added, hands checked. One boy tries to sneak outside without ear covering and is intercepted by an aunt who catches him by the back of his collar without even interrupting her sewing. This is such a smooth move that it has clearly happened many times. Joke 1 belongs to the boy who sighs like a defeated minister. You also learn quickly that layering is not just piling on everything you own. People build layers with purpose, softer inner cloth to protect skin, insulating middle layers to trap warmth, outer layers that block wind and take abrasion. If you sweat too much working, you loosen at the right moment, then tighten again before standing still. Wetness against the body is dangerous, so clothing management changes with activity. Winter labourers become their own thermostats, constantly adjusting ties and wraps while pretending this is not a specialised skill. Footwear gets a full lesson because your feet, apparently, are everyone's concern now. Cloth shoes can be lined or padded, but dry soles matter more than you expected. Straw inserts, extra insoles, wrapped leggings, and careful drying near heat without scorching all become part of the routine. A grandfather points at your toes and says, "If your feet get stupid, the rest of you follows." No one laughs because this is considered exact science. Near the doorway hangs a row of socks and foot wraps turned inside out to dry. The smell is not poetic, but the system is rotate, dry, mend, repeat. You watch a girl no older than 10 darning a heel with complete focus, while her younger brother pretends not to notice she's saving his winter. The household economy runs on tasks like this, small enough to overlook, critical enough to ruin the week if ignored. Quilts receive the same attention as clothing. In this village, bedding is a heat strategy, and bedding maintenance is serious business. Covers are shaken, sun aired whenever weather allows, spots mended before stuffing escapes, edges restitched, ties replaced. Depending on period and means, fillings may include cotton, hemp fibre, reed catkins, old cloth, or other local materials. Some are heavy and coarse, some are surprisingly soft from years of handling. A grandmother tells you to never trust a quilt that looks thick but feels lumpy. "That one lies," she says. This feels like textile advice and relationship advice at the same time. Quirky tidbit arrives in the form of a tiny child's winter cap with embroidered animal ears and bright stitching. The cap is adorable and also practical. In many Chinese traditions, children's hats and shoes can include protective motifs, animals, or symbolic designs meant to ward off illness or bad luck while also keeping them warm. A tiger head cap may look charming to you, but to a family it can carry a wish for strength and protection. The child wearing it, meanwhile, uses the tiger ears to intimidate a chicken and gets no results. By midday, you are recruited into beating bedding with a flexible stick to fluff the filling after airing. You're told not to hit too hard, then told you are hitting too softly, then told you are raising too much dust, then told dust means life. This is one of those village tasks where instruction arrives as a rolling debate from 3 generations and somehow still produces good results. Joke 2 is you, mainly. At a corner brazier used sparingly, a woman warms a needle tip slightly to help it pass through a thick layered seam. Another uses a thimble improvised from wrapped leather. Hands here carry specialised knowledge hidden inside ordinary motions. You start noticing how people protect fingertips with tiny habits, because split skin and puncture wounds become bigger problems in dry cold. A seamstress with cracked knuckles wraps 2 fingers in cloth strips and continues stitching at a pace that makes you feel decorative. Animal products appear where households can manage them. Sheep wool, felted pieces, fur trim, hides, and leather are valuable and used strategically, often on extremities or outer layers where wind bites hardest. Not every household has much access, and distribution reflects local wealth and trade links. One man's fur-lined cap marks him as fortunate. Another person's padded hemp hood marks them as skilled at making less do more. Warmth is unequal, but ingenuity is widely distributed. Historians still argue whether cotton adoption in certain rural northern areas spread fast enough to transform everyday winter comfort broadly in some periods, or whether regional access, taxation pressures, and local production limits kept many households dependent on older fibre systems far longer than popular narratives suggest. You do not need to settle the debate while watching a woman turn a worn summer garment into quilt stuffing. Material revolutions matter, yes, so does relentless reuse. As afternoon light thins, people sort repair piles by urgency, work clothes first, children's layers next because they outgrow everything while claiming they need nothing. Ceremonial or better garments last, wrapped and stored carefully away from daily grime. The sorting itself reveals values. Survival garments earn the finest labour. Beauty is not ignored, but utility goes to the front of the line in cold months. One young bride quietly shows you a hidden patch on a sleeve, stitched so neatly the mend becomes decoration. It catches the light for a moment and turns thrift into art. You realise winter villages are full of this, practical beauty tucked into necessity, a tied edge done cleanly, a quilt seam in even lines, a cap stitched with a bright thread simply because the maker had it and wanted the child to smile. Hard seasons do not erase beauty. They make it smaller and sharper. By evening, the room is crowded with folded layers warming near the safest heat, boots turned dry, wraps laid out for morning, and people checking tomorrow's weather by old signs and colder than usual joints. A man swears his left knee predicts wind better than any cloud. His wife says his left knee predicts chores he wants to avoid. Joke 3 lands, and even he laughs while rubbing the joint anyway. When you dress for night and early morning readiness, you finally understand the full system. Day layers are not random. Sleep layers are not random. What is kept near the bedding, what is dried by the hearth, what is worn for labour, what is saved for stillness. All of it is planned. The village cannot afford the luxury of being surprised by cold, so it prepares cloth like food and manages garments like fuel. You settle in with a borrowed padded coat around your shoulders and watch the last mending stitches disappear into dim light. Outside, the wind tests doors and walls. Inside, thread after thread has already answered it. The village wakes to a different kind of cold today, the kind that makes sound travel too clearly. You hear a bucket set down 3 courtyards away. You hear a goat complain as if it has a legal representation. You hear someone splitting kindling with careful, economical strikes, each one spaced just enough to avoid wasting effort. When you step outside, your breath hangs low and white, and the courtyards are already busy with a task that at first looks ordinary, and then reveals itself as part of the winter heating system in plain sight. Animals are being moved, fed, checked, and positioned with more intention than you expected. You had noticed livestock before, of course. Chickens scratching, a pig pen at the edge of a yard, maybe a donkey tethered under shelter, goats in one household, sheep in another. But now you see what winter does to the arrangement. Every species, every pen, every wall, every patch of ground gets reconsidered. The village is not only protecting animals from cold, it is also using their presence, their byproducts, and even their body heat as part of a broader survival plan. In many ancient Chinese villages, Livestock are essential household assets, not quaint background scenery. Pigs, chickens, goats, sheep, oxen, donkeys, and sometimes cattle or mules, depending on region and wealth, provide labour, manure, food, status, and security. In winter, keeping them alive and reasonably healthy becomes a major priority because losing an animal can damage a household's recovery long after the snow and frost are gone. This is the mainstream fact for today, and it becomes obvious the moment you watch a family fuss over a donkey's blanket with more seriousness than some modern people give to their passwords. You follow a middle-aged couple to the animal shelter built along the leeward side of a courtyard wall. The placement is deliberate. Wind hits the outer wall first, weakens, then slides over the roofline instead of cutting straight through the shelter. The wall behind holds a little warmth from whatever sun it can catch. The roof is low enough to trap warmth but high enough for air to move. Dry bedding goes down thick, damp bedding comes out fast. The woman says, "Cold is bearable, wet is trouble." You're beginning to suspect this phrase could be carved above every doorway in the village. The shelters smell strong, earthy, alive, and honestly a little dangerous to your city-trained nose. Straw, dung, animal breath, old wood, and the sharp, sweet smell of stored fodder all mix into a heavy barn warmth that is not exactly pleasant, but feels reassuring. You stand there with frozen cheeks and warm hands and understand the trade-off immediately. This place is work. This place is smell. This place is heat. A boy carries armfuls of straw to refresh bedding in a goat pen, scattering it with dramatic flair until his mother reminds him that straw is not confetti and he is not the emperor of goats. Joke 1 arrives early and deservedly. He lowers his performance level by about 10% and keeps going. You also notice how close some shelters sit to human living spaces without being carelessly mixed. There is a boundary, but not a huge one. In some rural traditions and colder regions across the world, humans and animals are kept in linked or adjacent structures, partly to conserve warmth and labour. In Chinese villages, the exact arrangement varies a lot by local building style, class, hygiene norms, and species. But the principle of using courtyard layout and shared walls to reduce exposure and save effort is very much alive. Nobody here is giving a speech about thermal zoning. They are just not crossing an icy yard 12 extra times a day if they can avoid it. Feed management turns out to be almost as complex as human food management. Fodder stacks are protected from snow, ground moisture, and theft by rodents. Coarser stalks go to some animals, finer fodder to others, and leftovers get reused in ways that make your head spin. Chaff, husks, bean haulms, cut straw, and whatever local fields produce all become winter feed in carefully judged proportions. A man breaks open a stack and checks the inside for dampness, then sniffs it, rubs it between his fingers, and nods. You ask what he's checking. Smell, warmth, rot, lies, he says. Fodder, like people, can look fine from a distance. One elderly widow keeps hens in a tighter winter coop lined with extra reed matting, and she speaks to them as if they are slow apprentices. She explains that even small drops in egg-laying matter to a household, and cold stress can weaken birds fast. The hens stare back with the ancient expression of creatures who contribute greatly, while pretending they invented labour. She has hung old cloth strips over part of the coop opening as a draft break while keeping ventilation above. It looks simple because it is simple. It also works. Then there is dung, which no one romanticizes and everyone values. Dried animal dung can serve as fuel in some regions, especially where wood is scarce and crop residues are precious, even where it is not burned much. Manure is winter wealth for future fields if collected, stored, and managed properly. You spend an hour helping shape and move material you would not have touched voluntarily in your previous life, and by the end you understand why people guard it. Spring grain does not care whether you found the task glamorous. quirky tidbit for today comes from a goat with a tiny bell wrapped in cloth so it will not ring much. You assume the cloth is decorative or accidental. It is neither. The family muffles it in winter because constant ringing indoors or near shelters agitates people and animals at night, and because every bit of calm matters when everyone is sleeping lightly. It is such a small adjustment that you laugh, then immediately respect it. Winter survival is full of these tiny decisions that sound ridiculous until you're cold and tired. The courtyard itself reveals another layer of planning. Paths are cleared not only for human traffic, but for carrying feed and water without slipping. Water vessels for animals are positioned to reduce freezing risk and reduce hauling distance. Tools used most often are hung under cover with handles off wet ground. A broken bucket hoop in summer is an annoyance. In winter, it can become a half-day problem with numb fingers and icy mud. So people fix things earlier, store things smarter, and arrange space like a puzzle with no spare pieces. A man with a face as weathered as a fence post shows you how he banks the outer side of a small pen with packed straw and earth to cut drafts at ground level. It looks rough, almost temporary, but when you kneel, you can feel the difference. The air near the bedding is noticeably calmer. He grins at your surprise and says, "You thought walls were only for people?" Fair point. The pig inside snorts as if claiming credit. Pigs, incidentally, are impossible to ignore. They are loud, opinionated, and deeply invested in meal schedules. A household pig can be a major asset, and winter care is a balancing act. Enough bedding to stay warm, enough feed to maintain health, enough cleanliness to avoid sickness, and enough sturdy pen repair to stop an escape attempt staged at exactly the worst possible moment. You witness a pig trying to nose open a weak board while its owner lectures it about morality. Joke 2 writes itself. There is a gentler scene with a family donkey whose breath steams in the dim shelter, while a girl brushes frost from its mane and checks its hooves for packed ice. Working animals are treated with a very practical tenderness. A healthy donkey or ox means transport, hauling, field readiness when thaw comes, and fewer labour injuries for humans. The girl wraps an old padded cloth across the animal's back and ties it neatly. Nothing fancy, just care translated into knots. You start to feel the hidden economy of warmth moving through the courtyard. Animals eat stored plants that humans cannot use directly. Their bodies create heat and manure. Their shelters are placed to reduce wind and labour. Human routines bend around them, and in return the animals support food production, hauling, and long-term survival. It is not sentimental. It is interdependence with muddy boots. Historians still argue whether the average northern village household kept enough livestock to make shared warmth or manure fuel a major winter factor, or whether these benefits are often overstated by later observers looking for tidy systems. Standing here, the answer seems less dramatic and more useful. No single animal solves winter, no single pen design solves winter, but each decision adds margin, extra bedding, better placement, dry feed, shorter routes, shared walls, collected manure. They stack the way wool repairs and clothing layers stack. Near sunset, a sudden gust sends fine powdery frost across the yard, and everyone reacts at once. Coop flap secured, feed cover tied, water bucket moved, goat tether checked, door latched. It happens so quickly that you realise the villagers practiced this response for years. No shouting, just motion. A child imitates the adults and ties a knot so enthusiastically he traps his own mitten to the handle. He looks betrayed by rope itself. Joke 3, and a useful lesson about winter tying technique. As evening settles, animal sounds soften. A goat shifts and exhales. Hens rustle on their roost. The pig mutters in its sleep like a disapproving uncle. Warmth from shelters lingers near the walls, and people make one last round with lanterns, checking latches and bedding. You join them, lantern light trembling across packed earth, boots crunching lightly over frost, and it becomes clear that the courtyard is not just the space outside the house. In winter, it is a managed zone where human life and animal life are arranged tightly enough to support each other, but carefully enough to stay healthy. When the doors close and the lane goes quiet, you can still sense the living weight of the village holding its heat in many forms. In walls, in bedding, in stored fodder, in animal bodies tucked behind reed screens and low roofs. The cold is still there, pressing in from every side. It just meets a village that has learned to answer with more than fire. The cold no longer feels like an event. It feels like a schedule. You wake before full light because everyone else does, and because winter days are too short to waste on sleepy confusion. The room is dim, the air near your face cool, your hands reluctant, and yet the household is already moving in a pattern so practiced that nobody speaks much. One person checks embers, another measures grain. Someone folds bedding away from the warmest area before damp from breath can settle too deeply into it. A child is sent for water and returns with exactly half the drama as last time, which counts as growth. Today you follow the rhythm of work itself. The quiet winter labour that keeps people alive when fields are not producing, and the temptation to sit still all day becomes surprisingly dangerous. Winter, in an ancient village, is never a season of doing nothing. It is a season of different work, carefully timed work, and work measured against heat and calories like a constant mental calculation. The first lesson comes before sunrise. People do the coldest, most necessary outdoor tasks early and efficiently, while they still have fresh strength. Animal feeding, water hauling, checking roofs and doors after night wind, bringing in fuel, clearing slick spots from paths. Nobody lingers outdoors to admire frost patterns. Frost patterns are nice, but they do not carry buckets. You join a pair of brothers hauling water and learn that the trick is not speed alone. It is route planning, fewer trips, fuller loads, safer footing, no wasted chatter while standing in the open. One brother says talking freezes your teeth. The other says only his talking does. Joke one, and both keep walking. Back inside. The labour changes character. Winter workrooms come alive with tasks postponed from busier agricultural months. Tools are repaired, handles are re-wedged, rope is twisted, baskets are mended, grain is winnowed in smaller batches near shelter. Bean sorting continues. Clothing repairs never truly end. A village that survives cold months well often treats winter as maintenance season, not idle season. This is the mainstream fact today, and you can see it in the sheer number of hands doing precision tasks by weak light. A carpenter sits near the best daytime light and sharpens blades with slow, careful strokes. The sound is soft and repetitive, almost sleepy, except that everyone nearby keeps glancing at him because sharp tools save effort, and effort saves food. He rehandles a hoe head that will not touch soil for weeks, maybe months. But when thaw comes, there will be no time for leisurely repairs. Winter labour is full of future-facing chores. You are feeding spring with your hands while snow still threatens. Beside him, two women spin and retwist thread from salvaged fibres, while discussing the exact right thickness for mending work clothes versus patching sacks. Their fingers move with a confidence that makes the process look easy, which is unfair because when they hand the spindle to you, your attempt resembles a nervous bird building a nest during an earthquake. One of them politely says, "It will improve." The other says, "Or we can carry water forever." Joke 2 lands without mercy. The village also manages bodies as part of winter labour. This surprises you at first because nobody talks about it like a formal rule, yet everyone practices it. Hard tasks are clustered. Warm-up tasks happen before fine fingerwork. Elderly people are given jobs that matter but can be done seated in warmth. Children are assigned repetitive chores that teach skill while keeping them moving enough to stay warm. People rotate between inside and outside work to avoid sweat-soaking clothing and then chilling them when they stop. It is an unspoken science of energy management. At midday, when the sun is highest and the cold loosens a little, the lanes stir again. This is when some households tackle larger outdoor tasks that need visibility and less brutal wind. Wood trimming, courtyard repairs, moving fodder, reshaping drainage edges, checking storage covers, cleaning tools that would freeze your fingers at dawn. You help patch a handcart wheel binding with cord and wedge pieces, while an uncle explains that winter is when carts are either repaired or cursed, and cursing has lower long-term usefulness. He says this while cursing the wheel, which seems to be his compromise with philosophy. Food preparation itself is labour, and winter amplifies it. Grain grinding, soaking dried vegetables, chopping hard roots, managing brines, cleaning pots with a little water, drying cloths and tools after washing so they do not freeze stiff. The work stretches through the day in short cycles timed around heat use. A person who can cook efficiently in winter is also managing fuel, sanitation, morale, and tomorrow's readiness. You begin to understand why cooks in this village are treated with the kind of respect usually reserved for strategic thinkers. Quirky tidbit for today arrives during an afternoon lull when several elders bring out game pieces scratched onto a board and begin a quiet match, while sorting seed and checking knots. It looks like leisure, and it is, but also not fully. Winter games, riddles, and handwork often blend together in village life, because idleness and morale are managed together. Hands stay busy, minds stay alert. Children learn by watching. A game can coexist with useful labour if someone is shelling beans while arguing over the move. One elder accuses another of cheating like a magistrate in fog, and nobody even looks up. This has clearly happened before. You also see how households avoid overworking themselves into cold exhaustion. In stories, survival often sounds like non-stop heroic effort. In reality, winter punishes poor pacing. If you sweat hard and then sit in damp clothing, the chill cuts deep. If you skip food to save supplies, you lose strength and make mistakes. If you stay up too late by weak light, tomorrow's tasks suffer. So people rest in short practical intervals, often while doing seated work. The line between resting and working blurs. Someone mends while listening. Someone shells beans while watching children. Someone warms hands and uses the moment to plan tomorrow's task order. Historians still argue whether peasant winter life in many regions is best described as a slack season or as a differently intense season, because tax labour, handicraft obligations, local markets, and household conditions vary so much. In this village, the answer feels obvious. The fields may sleep, but nobody else truly does. The pace changes, the muscles used change, the risks change, and the clock shrinks with the daylight. Near late afternoon, you join a small group heading to a nearby stand of scrub and managed wood to collect fallen branches and cut permitted growth. Fuel gathering in winter is a lesson in judgment. Wet wood is heavy and disappointing. Good branches disappear quickly. Carrying too much can injure you. Carrying too little means another trip through biting wind. The group moves with practical silence, snapping, trimming, bundling. One woman tests branches with a twist and small crack, rejecting pieces that look decent but hold damp at the core. You copy her and immediately choose wrong twice. She pats your shoulder and says, "The tree fooled you, not your fault." This is kind, and definitely not true. Back in the village, evening work begins before dark fully settles. Animal checks, water brought in, door snakes placed, bedding shaken, tools returned to hooks, embers managed. The same motions repeat daily. But your boredom never arrives because the details keep changing. A latch loosens, a child outgrows a sleeve, a jar lid chips, the path ices in a new spot. Winter is repetitive, yes, but never identical. There is also social work, invisible until you notice it. One household sends a bowl to an elder living alone. Another lends a tool and quietly asks about fodder levels while pretending not to ask. A boy is dispatched to fetch a neighbour for a roof check. A young mother gets help with water because her baby kept her up most of the night. Cooperation here is not announced with grand speeches. It is stitched into errands. That may be the most important labour of all, because a village survives not only on supplies but on timely noticing. Joke 3 appears when a man returns from outside with a frozen moustache tip, and pretends he has grown white whiskers of wisdom in one afternoon. His wife says wisdom would be more useful if it came with dry kindling. The room agrees. As night closes in, the indoor tasks become smaller and more precise. Needlework by lamp, tool handles rubbed with oil, sorting seeds, braiding cord, teaching children counting with beans and kernels, quiet talk, coughs, warm bowls. You can feel the day's labour settling into the room not as exhaustion alone but as order. Work has kept the house warmer, the animals fed, the tools ready, the food prepared, the clothing mended, the paths safer, the tomorrow more possible. You lie down later with hands that ache in a satisfying way, and a mind that finally understands what winter discipline means here. It is not grimness for its own sake. It is a rhythm designed to prevent panic. Do small tasks before they become large. Move before you grow stiff. Rest before you grow foolish. Repair before you need. Share before someone has to ask twice. Outside, the cold keeps its own schedule across the fields and roofs. Inside, the village keeps a better one. By now, the nights feel longer, not because the sky changes, but because people start using more of the dark for things that are not purely practical. The chores still happen. The pots still get scraped clean. The doors still get checked twice. But once the room settles and the cold presses against the walls like a patient creditor, another layer of village life comes forward. Tonight you see how people survive winter in the head and heart, not only in the stomach and the hands. The room glows low and amber. Lamplight trembles on plaster and cloth. Someone adds a little oil with the care of a person pouring from a bank account. A child is drowsing against an aunt's shoulder, while an elder rubs his own knees and mutters that the weather has become sharp in the joints, which seems to be both diagnosis and poetry. Outside, the wind is not even dramatic. It just keeps going, which is somehow ruder. Winter morale in a village like this is never treated as a luxury. People might not use that phrase, but they clearly understand the principle. Fear spreads. Irritation spreads. Hopelessness spreads. So does steadiness. So does laughter. So does ritual. Tonight, you watch all of them being managed with the same quiet skill used for fuel and grain. An elder woman begins by setting out a small seasonal offering near the household shrine shelf. Simple and matter of fact. A bit of food, a respectful bow, a murmured wish for protection, health and endurance. In many Chinese households across different eras, domestic rituals tied to ancestors, household gods, and seasonal cycles form part of daily life, especially in stressful periods. The exact forms vary wildly by region, class, and period. But the mainstream fact is this: ritual practice often serves both spiritual meaning and emotional regulation. You can call it faith, habit, or household psychology. The room treats it as normal. No one pauses or work for the ritual. That is what strikes you. A woman keeps folding cloth while bowing in turn. A child peeks, gets nudged into proper posture, then peeks again. A man at the edge of the warm platform finishes tying a cord and joins the gesture a moment later. Reverence here lives beside labour, not separate from it. The gods, ancestors, and spirits, if they are paying attention, are apparently expected to understand winter schedules. Afterward, the old woman burns a pinch of dried herb near the doorway and window seam, letting the smoke drift lightly. She says it freshens the room and chases off bad influences. Whether those bad influences are spirits, stale air, or neighbours' gossip is left pleasantly unclear. Quirky tidbit for tonight arrives in exactly this form, where smoke, scent, and belief overlap. Many households in many times use aromatic plants. Smoke, or incense-like materials in winter rooms for ritual, odour control, and the feeling of purification. When the world outside is frozen and closed off, making the inside feel cleared matters. Then comes the medicine basket. It is not a physician's chest from a Grand City tale. It is a practical household collection wrapped in cloth and stored where adults can reach it fast. Dried ginger, some preserved roots, bitter herbs, salves, cloth strips, a spoon for measuring, maybe a few ingredients passed down with exact instructions and many warnings. A middle-aged mother opens it while talking to a neighbour about a persistent cough, and immediately the room shifts into consultation mode. 3 elders offer advice, 2 people disagree on steeping time, and one uncle contributes a completely useless story about a man who recovered after drinking something horrifying made with onions and pride. Herbal care in village winters is a patchwork of local knowledge, family tradition, practical observation, and whatever trained medical knowledge filters in through healers, travelling practitioners, or local literate households. You hear people talk in body patterns rather than laboratory terms. Warm the stomach, loosen the chest, move the cold out, soothe the throat, rest the lungs, keep the feet warm, keep the room aired without chilling the baby. It is not modern clinical language, but it reflects real pattern recognition built over generations. Historians still argue whether later written medical categories map neatly onto what ordinary villagers actually practiced at home, or whether household treatment was far more improvised than elite texts suggest. Watching this family, improvised does not mean random, it means adaptive. They know what tends to help a dry cough versus a phlegmy cough. They know when sweat is a good sign, and when it is not. They know who can tolerate bitter decoctions and who will spit them dramatically into a bowl and start a household argument. You're given a warm infusion for your throat, just because your face looks cold, which is rude but not inaccurate. It is sharp with ginger and something earthy, maybe jujube or another local ingredient depending on what this household has. The warmth spreads quickly. The child watches you sip and asks if it tastes terrible. You say, only in an educational way. Joke one earns a tired smile from the room. There are also little body rituals that are almost invisible until you notice them. People rub hands and ears before bed. Feet are dried carefully. Some massage calves and knees with oil or warmed cloth. A grandmother presses points along a child's hand while humming under her breath. An old man warms his palms and holds them over his eyes for a moment before lying down. None of this is dramatic medicine. It is maintenance, comfort, and the kind of touch that keeps fear from growing too large in the dark. You witness a shared coughing etiquette too, practical and stern. Turn away, cover, do not lean over food, keep bedding separate if fever rises. Air the room briefly at the right time instead of sealing everyone in stale heat for hours. Ancient villages do not have germ theory in modern terms, but people are not fools. They know sickness passes between bodies, especially in winter rooms. Their explanations differ. Their precautions can still be observant and effective. Morale gets its strongest support from sound. Stories begin once bowls are cleared and medicine talk settles. Not grand epics every night, just enough narrative to carry minds somewhere warmer for an hour. A fox spirit tale, a local fool tale, a remembered winter so cold a ladle froze to a bucket, a story about an official who visited in silk and left wrapped in peasant blankets. Everyone claims it is true. Everyone enjoys it more because it might not be. A younger man plays a simple tune on a flute with 2 notes that wobble in the cold room air before smoothing out. The sound is thin and beautiful and a little melancholy. Exactly right for a winter night when nobody wants too much excitement. A child taps time on the platform edge until his mother gives him the look that stops all future percussion. Joke 2 arrives when the old uncle with bad advice insists he also sings. The room responds like people who have survived worse but would rather not tonight. He sings anyway. 1 line, badly, and is silenced with a steamed bun placed directly in his hand. This is the most humane conflict resolution system you've ever seen. The conversation moves, as it often does, to signs and omens. Who dreamed of water? Who heard an owl? Whether a ring around the moon means snow. Whether a certain frost pattern on the outer wall predicts clear weather. Some beliefs are folkloric, some are weather lore, some are memory dressed in superstition. You notice nobody needs them to be perfectly scientific in order for them to be useful. They help people think, prepare, compare notes, and feel less blind before the season. The line between observation and belief is not always sharp in a village winter, and perhaps it does not have to be. A mother ties a small protective charm thread on her child's sleeve after a recent fever broke. Is it medicine? Is it prayer? Is it relief with something to hold on to? Yes, probably. The child mostly likes the colour and uses it to show off to another child, which feels like a healthy recovery sign. You ask quietly whether the village calls a healer often in deep winter. The answer is complicated. If someone can travel safely and if the household can pay or exchange labour or goods, yes. If roads are bad, if the weather is cruel, if the illness seems ordinary, households manage first with what they know. This is where winter becomes emotionally heavy. Not every cough is dangerous. Not every fever means disaster. Some do. People live with uncertainty the way they live with wind, by habit and vigilance. And still, they make room for warmth of another kind. A girl braids her grandmother's hair while listening to a story she already knows. A boy falls asleep with his hand still curled around a carved game piece. Two neighbours trade teasing insults while one hems the other's cuff. The ritual shelf lamp burns low. Someone refills it. Someone else lowers the wick to save oil. The room breathes together. Joke 3 comes very softly when the grandmother, after giving everyone serious advice about rest and avoiding drafts, reaches over to steal the warmest spot on the platform edge before anyone else can claim it. She catches you seeing it and says, "Wisdom has privileges." No one argues. As the night deepens, the voices slow, the stories shorten, the medicine basket is wrapped again and returned to its place. The herb smoke fades into the ordinary smells of cloth and warm brick. Outside, the village is mostly dark now, but not empty. Behind many walls, people are doing the same things. Brewing, rubbing sore joints, whispering prayers, telling stories, making room for fear without feeding it too much. You lie back and feel how this season is endured not only with walls and food and work, but with rituals that mark time, remedies that offer action, and shared habits that keep loneliness from freezing into panic. The cold outside remains exact and merciless. Inside, people answer it with memory, belief, and care, each one adding a little heat that no fuel stack can measure. The storm announces itself before dawn in the way the house sounds wrong. You wake to a low, grinding hiss across the roof and walls. Not rain, not ordinary wind, but driven snow or hard ice grains sweeping sideways over packed earth and tile. The room is darker than it should be at this hour because light is being swallowed outside. Someone is already up. You hear feet on the floor, then the doorbar lift and settle again almost immediately after a blast of cold air punches in and makes everyone on the sleeping platform pull quilts tighter at once. No one says blizzard dramatically, or they just start doing the storm routine. That is the first thing you notice. The household does not panic, but the speed changes. Two adults move at once toward different tasks. One checks embers and sets water to heat. Another starts pulling on outer layers, tightening ties with hands that know exactly where each knot goes even half asleep. A child is told to stay put in a tone so flat and firm that even the child's usual arguments freeze mid-sentence. You sit up and become useful by copying the nearest competent person. Today you see what happens when the village plan gets tested by weather that does not care about plans. A storm like this is dangerous for reasons beyond temperature. Paths vanish, roof loads increase, drifted doors trap people, livestock shelters fail, fuel gets damp, water hauling becomes risky, illness worsens in shut rooms. Communication between households becomes harder exactly when coordination matters most. In northern rural China, severe winter storms have historically threatened food access, buildings, and labour capacity as much as comfort. This is the mainstream fact for today, and it arrives in your bones as soon as the first door check sends needles of cold through every seam in your clothing. By full morning, if you can call it that under a grey sky, the lane outside is almost unreadable. Snow and blown frost have banked against walls and gates. The wind is not theatrical. It is relentless, pushing, testing, slipping into every weakness. A man from the next courtyard bangs on the gate with a stick instead of shouting because his voice would vanish. He needs help clearing a drift that has blocked part of his animal shelter entrance. You go with 2 others, heads down, cloth wraps across your face. The cold bites any exposed skin instantly, and the wind steals breath if you turn wrong. Working in storms is not heroic. It is miserable and awkward. Shovel, scoop, push, brace, repeat. Snow comes back while you move it. Hands go numb inside layers, then ache when blood returns. Someone swears at the sky. Someone else swears at the shovel handle. This is the village's version of weather poetry. At the shelter, the problem is worse than expected. A drift has packed hard against the outer side, and one roof edge is shedding melt and refreeze in a dangerous lip. Inside, the goats are alive and crowded, angry but warm enough. The adults move quickly, clearing the entrance, bracing the edge. Shifting bedding away from damp, you're assigned to carry dry straw from a covered stack while another person checks lashing ropes. Every task is immediate and specific. Nobody wastes breath blaming whoever should have reinforced the corner earlier, even if everyone is definitely thinking it. A child from that household appears wrapped so thoroughly, only eyes and boots are visible, carrying a small bundle of cord. He plants himself in the snow like a tiny official and refuses to go back inside until his mother snaps at him. He stomps away with the offended dignity of someone who believes he was essential to structural engineering. Joke 1 survives the storm. Across the village, similar crises are unfolding. Roofs need checking, doors need digging out, water jars need protecting from freezing too hard. Elderly people living alone need quick visits if possible. You start to see how hierarchy and cooperation work under pressure. The village headman and senior householders do not make speeches. They send people who has strong backs, who has spare cord, who has a roof ladder, who can check on the widow near the lane bend, who must stay because a baby has fever. Decisions are blunt because time and heat are being spent with every minute outdoors. Historians still argue whether village authority during seasonal emergencies was usually more communal and negotiated, or more strongly directed by lineage elders and local power holders. In this storm, the answer looks like both. Orders move through relationship. People comply because they must, but also because next time the trouble will be at their wall, their door, their animal pen. By midday, the indoor consequences begin to show. Rooms stay closed longer to preserve warmth, which means air grows heavier. Coughing sounds sharper in the quiet. A child develops a feverish flush. An old man who was fine yesterday now wheezes after too much time outside clearing a path. Winter storms force hard choices between ventilation and heat, between rest and urgent labour, between using extra fuel now and risking shortage later. This is where survival stops looking like tidy systems and starts looking like trade-offs. In one household, a young mother debates whether to use more of a precious fuel bundle to keep broth hot for a sick child. The grandmother says yes immediately. An uncle hesitates, glancing at the stack. The silence lasts one breath too long, and then he nods and feeds the fire. You feel the arithmetic in the room, even though no numbers are spoken. Fuel spent today may be needed next week. Fuel not spent today may cost more if the child worsens. There is no perfect choice, only chosen risk. Quirky tidbit for today comes from a practical superstition revived under stress. As the wind peaks, one elder ties a strip of red cloth to an inner door latch to keep the storm from entering angry. Everyone rolls their eyes and nobody removes it, in hard weather. Small symbolic acts return because they cost almost nothing and give frightened minds something to do besides spiral. The latch still needs bracing. The red cloth does not replace work. It sits beside work. You are sent with hot water and a bowl of thick porridge to an older widow whose son is away with transport work in another settlement. The lane between courtyards is half blocked, and you move by wall edges, stepping where others stepped. When you arrive, she opens only a crack, then wider once she recognises the voice behind you. Her room is cold but orderly. She has already stuffed cloth at the threshold and banked extra bedding near the wall. She accepts the bowl without fuss, asks which roofs are shedding badly, and tells you to check the Wu family's north corner because it always lies in storm wind. Even alone, she's still part of the village's sensor network. Back at the main house, the storm has shifted from pure wind to heavier snow. This sounds kinder until you go outside and feel the added weight collecting on every horizontal surface. Roof poles come out. Men and women alike knock and sweep from safer angles where they can. Nobody climbs carelessly. A broken leg in a storm can be more dangerous than the storm itself. You stand below and drag cleared snow away from the eaves so it does not pile against the wall and melt into trouble later. Joke 2 appears in the form of a chicken somehow escaping confinement and strutting through a snowbank, as if it personally defeated winter. 3 adults stop mid-task to chase it with the grim urgency usually reserved for flying embers. The chicken wins the first round. Inside again. The room becomes a recovery station between sorties outdoors. Gloves and wraps are rotated near warmth. Wet edges are dried. People drink hot liquids fast. Faces are checked for frostbite patches. A woman rubs another's fingers until she hisses and laughs at the same time. The sick child sleeps a little. The old man's wheezing settles after steam and rest. Someone records in memory which household is low on dry bedding and which has spare. This storm is not only testing walls, it is testing the village's ability to redistribute help without ceremony. By late afternoon, the wind eases enough for voices to travel. Calls pass over walls and through gates, short and practical. All safe. Roof holding. Need straw. Need water. The answers matter as much for morale as for logistics. Knowing the next courtyard is coping keeps fear from growing monstrous. Isolation is one of winter's sharpest tools. The village blunts it with noise. Joke 3 comes when the old uncle who always gives bad advice announces he predicted this storm exactly based on his knees, the moon, and the behaviour of a pig. His wife, while wringing out a wet cloth by the hearth, says he also predicted clear skies yesterday. He replies that the pig changed its mind, even in storm conditions. This argument has excellent structural integrity. As evening falls, the danger is not over, but the first hard wave has passed. Doors are dug clear enough to open. Animals are fed and dry. The widow has hot food. The sick child is warmer. Roofs are holding for now. Fuel stacks took losses, but not disaster. Everyone looks tired in that flat winter way, beyond complaint for a while. The room smells of wet wool, hot broth, and relief. You sit with a bowl in both hands and feel the lesson settle deeper than any single trick of wall, quilt, or food jar. A village survives deadly winter not because plans prevent trouble, but because people know how to break those plans apart and rebuild them under pressure. Priorities shift, labour moves, fuel is reallocated, help crosses yards quickly, pride gets smaller, needs get named. Outside, snow still drifts along the walls and the cold waits for the next mistake. Inside, the village has made it through one more test by answering weather with what it cannot freeze easily: coordination, memory, and the habit of showing up before the damage spreads. The storm leaves behind a strange quiet that feels almost louder than the wind. Morning light returns pale and thin, sliding over roofs burdened with uneven snow and courtyards marked by yesterday's urgent footsteps, shovel cuts, and dragged bundles. You step outside and the village looks battered but intact. Smoke threads rise from several homes. A gate creaks open. Someone coughs, spits, and begins sweeping a path before the sun has done much of anything. Survival, here, does not celebrate itself for long. It checks damage, resets routines, and starts preparing for the next problem. The cold is still sharp, but there is a subtle change in how people move. Not relaxed exactly, just steadier. The emergency speed is gone. The long winter speed returns. That alone feels like a victory. You join a lane crew clearing compacted snow and ice from the most used paths between courtyards and shared areas. The work is less frantic than yesterday and more punishing in a different way. Packed drifts have hardened. Shovel edges catch. Frozen ruts fight back. Everyone keeps at it in short bursts, switching grips, stamping warmth into feet, then resuming. A man says clearing post-storm ice is like arguing with an old magistrate. Slow, stubborn, and somehow your fault. Joke one wakes up the crew better than the weak sun. As the day develops, the village shifts into assessment mode. Roofs that held are checked again because holding once is not the same as holding safely. Wall bases are inspected for melt seepage. Reed screens are retied. Animal shelters are cleaned out where damp crept in. Bedding that got wet in the storm is aired at the first chance. Fuel stacks are restacked to separate dry from questionable. The whole settlement feels like a body checking for bruises after a fall. You follow the village headman and two elders as they make rounds, and this is where the deeper architecture of survival becomes visible. They are not only looking at damage, they are reading household strength, who lost fodder, who spent too much fuel on a sick child, which elderly person seems weaker than they admit, which family has enough labour to help others tomorrow. In many traditional villages, especially under harsh seasonal pressure, social knowledge is as important as physical supplies. This is the mainstream fact today, and you can see it written in glances, not ledgers. At one house, the old man's wheezing is improved, but not gone. A neighbour quietly drops off a bundle of dry stalk fuel and pretends he is just moving things around. At another, the widow you visited yesterday sends back a small bag of pickled greens as thanks and also as proof she is still participating, not merely receiving. Reciprocity matters, even in tiny amounts. It protects dignity and keeps aid flowing in both directions over time. Quirky tidbit for today comes from a repair ritual that is half practicality and half memory. Before resealing a cracked threshold, one family presses a few grains into the fresh clay and smooths over them while murmuring a wish for full jars and steady feet. Is it construction? Is it blessing? Yes. Villagers often preserve small acts like this because they tie ordinary repair to household continuity. Even if the grains do nothing physical, the people doing it become more attentive, and attention is never wasted. By noon, sunlight strikes one south-facing wall and turns it from merely cold to faintly warm. People drift toward it instinctively while working. Quilts come out for airing. A bench appears. Someone sits to mend in the light. A child falls asleep upright for 10 minutes and wakes furious at being moved. The village is using the sun again the way it uses everything else. Carefully, immediately, without ceremony. You spend part of the afternoon with a carpenter and a mason patching a damaged shed corner. As they work, they explain why some repairs are temporary and some must wait for drier weather, better materials, or more labour. Winter teaches triage. Make it safe now. Make it solid later. Remember what later means. You realise that many things you admired as ancient permanence are actually layers of timed maintenance, each generation adding, replacing, reinforcing. Endurance looks like permanence from a distance. Up close, it looks like constant upkeep. Historians still argue whether later nostalgia has exaggerated the self-sufficiency of ancient villages, especially in severe climates, compared with the real dependence many communities had on trade, taxes, relief networks, or regional markets. Watching this village, the answer again feels mixed. They are remarkably capable, They are not magical. Salt comes from somewhere. Iron comes from somewhere. Some fibres, medicines, and tools come through exchange. But what they do locally with limited inputs is extraordinary. They turn access into systems. They turn systems into habits. They turn habits into survivable winters. A group of children is assigned to collect dropped twigs and broken reed pieces from storm debris and sort them by usefulness. Half the pile is fuel. A quarter is patching material. The rest is ask an adult before throwing. One boy holds up a bent stick and claims it is a dragon. An aunt takes it, snaps it cleanly in two, and says now it is kindling. Joke 2 is brutal, efficient, and culturally on brand. Inside, meal preparation resumes its normal rhythm, but with storm after effects folded in. Slightly more hot broth for workers who are out longest. Softer foods for the old man with the chest cough. Extra sour greens for appetite.